Hey pilots, welcome back to this Jetworks build series. In this video we'll be building the BAC TSR2. I'll be using a FMS 70mm running 6S. So once you've got your stuff together, first part is to take the fuselage belly and just form the intakes just slightly against the edge of a table, just to give it a wee bit of bend and curve up. Now, as this model's quite long, it comes in two pieces on the plan, and here I am just taking it and just slightly trimming it so I can get as snug a fit as possible. And it was a bit tight going on, so again just a wee touch trimming. Once it was happy it was nice and tight, just add a wee bit glue. I'm using UHU-POR. I need to try some different glues, but in this case UHU-POR is what we're using. Now once I've got it glued together, I'm just using a wee bit of tape, pushing the two pieces as close together as possible, nice and tight, and then just holding it together with some tape until the glue cures. So next step's bulkhead 1. Now in this guide, please do refer to the build guide. Obviously in this video I do jump back and forward a little bit. So once bulkhead 1's on, just squared it up, wiped away the excess glue. So next part is the fuselage lower corner reinforcers. Taking a scrap piece of 6mm foam, Depron, and just marking along the nose of the belly panel, just to give me a wee guide for that 6mm spacing. And I've got the 4 corner reinforcers here. Some of them are a wee bit squint and a wee bit not as straight as the plans show, but I've got a small amount of glue on one side, smudge it together with 2 pieces and then separate them up and add them to each individual piece, making sure they're in the right orientation. And it uses minimal glue with a good adhesion, so you don't have that surplus glue coming out. And then what I'm doing on the bottom where it's going to meet up against the fuselage, just using a wee sanding block and making sure the base of it is really smooth, so that I know I've got a good adhesion onto the fuselage belly itself. Now on the plans, there's a wee bit missing for the plans where the former goes at the back there. So what I've done, just used the corner reinforcers just to measure it along, and then I've marked where the fuselage piece goes. Here's the other bulkhead, putting that in just now. Not actually sure why I put that in. It's supposed to be the next step, but I thought let's just get it in anyway. So on the plans on the fuselage, forward fuselage sides, we're just shaping them, getting them onto the RX tray just to get that nice curve. And I've 3D printed the shot cones and marked from the plan onto this side, just so where it's going to go, then I can glue it on later on. So again, I'm just using the RX tray as just reference. I'm pulling it against the table just to form a nice curve so it meets up nice and even to the RX tray, the receiver tray, whatever receiver you choose to use. And just marking at the tip there where I'm going to put a wee 45 degree, maybe even 50, just a wee chamfer the side so they meet up nice and smooth together. And with a sharp blade, just be careful, just gently trimming away a small amount on each side. Obviously this is the inside. Now we test fit to see how it looks. I'm trying to get it as flush as possible so it's the nice smooth transition. Again, just another wee trim. And the same on the opposite side. As you can see, that's the wee pen marks that I put on there actually removed now. Once I was quite happy with that, Just measuring it up against the fuselage just to make sure that I've got the spacing for the fuselage side shaper just quite correct. So just holding it at the front with a wee bit of tape, and then just marking it up on the fuselage belly just so I can see where it's supposed to go. As I say, it's no on the plans. Craig's going to update them. A small amount of yoo-hoo, smudge it about. And then the fuselage corner reinforcers, time to stick these down. So again, just using the markings that I've made, just lining it up. Bit of glue in the bottom there, offer it up to the fuselage belly, smudge it about a wee bit so there's a nice even application all the way along it. And one side I'd marked up with pins because the glue was quite wet. This side it's had a wee bit of time to air dry, so it tacks down very well because obviously it's contact adhesive that we're using. Once I was happy with that, removed the pins. Time to get on to the next part. So I'm just checking out the battery position. I've actually got a 6S brick there, I think it was 4000. Just so that if I do get to using that when it comes to flying, I want to make sure there's a nice space for it to be accepted into the fuselage itself. So I'm just trimming away wee corners on the inside. Obviously leaving the outside as it is because the fuselage sides are going to meet up against it. And just carefully trimming off wee bits. And yeah, the battery fits in there quite well. So it's time to stick the fuselage sides to the belly. Small amount of yoo-hoo along the contact surface there. And using a scrap piece of foam, just smudging it about. A bit along the bulkheads. And I'll offer it up, just smudging it back and forward a wee bit there. Lining it up with bulkhead 1. And I'm just going to use some pieces of masking tape just to keep it nice and tight and hold it in place. A wee modelling pin through the sides onto the bulkheads. Again, just to hold it. And then we'll use some masking tape just to pull the sides in close to the belly panel. So it's a nice tight fit. And as you can see, I'm only putting in one side here just now. Repositioning the fuselage shaper. And a small amount of glue along one of the contact surfaces for the receiver tray. Wee bit of chance to air dry, and then we'll put that back in. So before I put the next side on, chose to install the ESC. So I cut a hole that would accept the ESC, glued it in place, and then I added some 3mm Depron just to where there was holes, and I sanded it to get as smooth as I could, just to try and keep a nice clean airflow over it so that the ESC's actually on the side and keep it nice and cool. So again, just like we did on the opposite side, some glue along the contact surfaces. And we'll offer that up. I did make a wee space or trimmed a relief at the back there just for the ESC wires to come through. Again, just using a wee bit of masking tape just to hold it in place. Get it as nice and tight as possible. A couple of modelling pins against the bulkhead. And then on the bottom, just pulling the belly panel up as close to the sides as possible. Just to make sure it's nice and tight. Remove any gaps. Just let the glue cure. And then on the back, pulling it nice and tight shut. A couple of pieces of tape. Just so we've got a nice smooth transition. Push all together, and another couple of modelling pins just put in just to tack it in place just till the glue cures. So next step that I'm doing is the bulkheads while we're at it, since we're at the front of the fuselage, and then we'll put in the canopy supports as well. Now these are in later parts of the build, but rather than going back and forward, I chose to put them in just now. So once the bulkhead 3's in, canopy supports. Some of them I did have to trim ever so slightly. You will find that with the making your own kits. Be a bit of glue in the contact surfaces, and then offer them up. The large space at the front next to bulkhead 1 and the small space at the back. So again, we're going to move on to the fuselage upper corner reinforcers. Like I was saying, this is later on in one of the build steps. So just test fitting it up. Small amount of glue along one side, and then just smudge them together, and then offer them up. So you've got 4 pieces with just glue in one. Nice tight fit. Again, just small amount of glue along one side of the two that's glued together. Smudge it about, and then with here the large space again goes at the front and the small space goes at the back. These are for the magnet panels. Magnet bridge. Now here, bulkhead 3, I did actually move that back. What I should have did was trim a small amount off, because bulkhead 3 I had to trim it up later on. So here we are on the magnet panels. Again, this is later on in the build guide, but while we're working on the hatch, I thought let's just get them all in. Work from the front to the back. So the rear magnet panels in. In the front one again, just a small amount of glue around the contact surfaces. Tacked it in with a couple of modelling pins, and in the back one went with some tape. And again on the front some tape just to pull it together so that a nice contact. And then moving on to the forward bridge panels in the cockpit. Small amount of glue in the contact surfaces, push that into position. And then the same with the forward. There was a wee bit extra there, but we'll trim that off later. And then the next step we're doing is the middle fuselage upper corner reinforcers. Now this will take a wee bit of trimming. So first I've cut the angle of what I think will suit. Trim it off at the back. And then we'll glue one piece in at a time. And we'll layer it up side by side. And then we should get a nice tight fit. So there's a wee bit of glue in there, and I just let it air dry ever so slightly, and then went back in, make sure it was level with the top, and then on with the opposite side. Again, just in the contact surfaces, a wee spot of glue, and trimming each one as you go. Allowing a wee bit of air time in between each, so that when I offer it up it's going to stick nice and tight quickly. That's that, just smoothed away any excess glue. So the next step we're going on to is the rear corner reinforcers. Again, just using 6mm piece of foam and just marking a 6mm edge along the side just to show where we're going to put in the corner reinforcers. Spot of glue on one side, smudge it about with 2 of them together, pull it off and offer it up to the next piece. Again, so it's just a very small amount of glue being used, but you get a nice bond. Just checking that the bases were nice and smooth. And then a small amount of glue along the contact surface. Offer it up along with the line, smudge it about a wee bit. and then do the same with the opposite side. Just again giving the glue a short time to air dry, so we get good contact. And we're just placing it down a couple of inches by a couple of inches, just so that we get it nice and level. Trimming up a wee bit excess at the back, and then do the same with the opposite side. So here what we're going to do is we chamfer at the front about a 45-degree angle. Now you only need to take it down to the first EDF bulkhead spacing. I actually, in some of my wisdom, ended up just trimming it all the way along. Not thinking, I just thought, I'll remove some of the foam, save a bit of weight. However, you actually need the square 6mm pieces to help accepting the bulkhead, so there's a nice bit of glue along it. So the EDF I've got here, it's 70mm long, and the bell mouth's no removable. There is a visible line there, but it's fixed, so just be mindful when you're cutting out your EDF mounts. Take into account the length of the unit and whether you can remove the bell mouth or not. So I've adjusted these. I've actually moved this one back, I think it was 12-13mm. As now, you can just chop that off. What I've chose to do is 3D print a housing for it, just a lip, so that'll slip in there nice and tight, and it'll keep it nice and flush, so that obviously I don't have to remove that. So what I've done is I've chamfered the edges of the bulkhead itself, so it sits up nice and flush as possible. Yeah, there's maybe a millimetre or two around about it, but it should be nice and flush. And then the EDF intake will glue nice and flush on that as well, and then we'll have a straight through airflow, nothing impeded there. So that's what I've chose to do. Obviously, like I say, rather than chopping off the bell mouth, print a wee flange there. Also, I've had to reduce that 13mm there. I've actually had to reduce this in the Z-axis and print it so that it should, the plan is to come up flush against the rear bulkhead. So that's what we're going to do. And before I've had a wee think about how we're going to proceed with this. Obviously, I've cut a wee gap in the back there to allow the wires to come out, because there is a channel there to house the wires underneath. So what we'll do before we get to fixing the EDF bulkheads, the side panels and the intake, I'll run a couple of servo extension cables. Hopefully, if I aim them, these will run through the bulkheads and stuff as well. So that one's there, and then the next one, once I've got these in, I'll test it, make sure that the servo cables are, well, the extension cables are all fine. You will go. Right, your angles. go. And as you can see, I've cut an extra hole there. So just connect these up just now. 6 channel receiver should be fine. Ailerons, if we said aileron, elevator 2, ESC and 3, ESC cables. Okay, what we'll do my trusty string. Wee bit of string onto it, and then what we'll do is pull it through. There we go, ESC cable. So just remember that when you're fitting things, that try and remember all your cables. ESC in there. I'll use rudder spare 5 and 6 for flaps. Should be good. Then I may also, while this is in here, what we can do while the receiver's in there, cut a small slot so that if we ever lose signal, have any issues, need to rebind the plane, we can plug this into the bind port, so that when the wing, everything's all in, closed, fixed together, we still have access to our bind port. So with the widening of these slots, had to do the same on the side panels, and obviously the top panel, which is the wing plate, I've extended these to match the EDF size itself. So before we get to doing all that, I think what we'll do next is install the servos. So when we pre-install the servos, like the bottom picture, that's what we're trying to aim for. So what we're doing here is I'm just forcing them in carefully to the side panel, just to see what kind of space and how the cut actually fits the servos that we're using, and just making small relief there for the wires, and just a wee bit at the top as well where the servo screw goes in top, just to hold the control arm. I was quite happy with how both of them were positioned. So getting the servo reinforcer, again just pushing it in so that I can show where the arms, making a wee indentation onto it, and then cut out a wee relief for the servo arms or the lips, and then again just making a wee small relief in the reinforcer for the wire coming out the back of the servo. And do the same with the opposite side, just cutting the wee reliefs out, and again a wee bit for the wire. Once I was happy with the placement, a wee bit of glue on one side, smudge them about, obviously the opposite sides, a wee bit of glue around the servo, and then put the servo reinforcer in. Allow that to cure, and that'll give a good hold to the servos while they're in. So doing the 70mm bulkhead. Now it was a bit fiddly for getting the bulkheads, the intake and the exhaust all together, and putting them in side by side. That's what we're aiming for here. So we've got the wires in. Obviously I've put through some extension cables from the receiver through to a wee space that I've cut in the bottom. I'm going to start feeding the wires through the EDF bulkheads. Now, like I say, this is a wee bit fiddly because the wires are underneath it. If I had installed the EDF mounts and the EDF itself, it would have been a wee bit, I probably know too much of a pain, but I just thought if I do it this way and get it all together, especially when I've got the 3D printed components. So I've got the motor wires and just trying to get them through the exhaust tubes, thrust tubes. Like I say, if I had mounted the EDF bulkheads, this would have been a bit of a pain. So I already tested the wires for the orientation of the EDF for the motor itself when it spools up. Just putting it into place, checking the wires are through. Got the EDF hooked up to the ESC. The exhaust there, just seeing where it is I'm going to put it. And then I've got the exhaust former on the back. Former, I'm not sure that's the correct choice of words. But the reason I've got that on is so that when I go to add in the glue, the exhaust will be in the right location and nice and level. So there'll be extension cables going out to the Elevon servos, hooking them up together, and then I'm just putting a wee spot of hot glue on it just to hold them, just to help that they don't come loose. And then along the rear belly panel, just putting some glue along the contact surfaces, offering up one side of the rear fuselage, smudging it about a little, and then pushing in the EDF into the locating points just to make sure it's nice and where it should be. Again, just a small amount of masking tape along the sides and the belly panel just to make sure it meets up nice and well. There's a wee gap there at the front. Could have been doing with an extra bit of tape there, I think. But all looks good. And there's the flap servos. Now there's the intake. So what I've done, obviously I'd made the wee lip earlier, glued that onto the intake and pushed that into the EDF unit. So it's should now all be level and straight. At least it's all in and all wired up. Small amount of glue along the contact surfaces again on the opposite side. And then here I'm just putting some glue along the exhaust bulkhead where it's going to meet up with the rear of the EDF unit. Smudge it about so it's a wee bit tacky. Offer up the last side to the EDF bulkheads, line them up, and then using some tape again just to pull it close together so we've got a nice flat and even bond. Once I was happy that that's in, it's time to square up the EDF thrust tubes, and by using the mount at the back, that way I knew that it would be straight and level. And just repositioning the thrust tube so that I was happy with where it was going, up against the end of the EDF unit. Squaring it off at the back, adding a couple of modelling pins and copious amounts of masking tape just to hold it in place. Then again reposition the the thrust tube. And then I had a wee look down it to make sure I was happy with it. Now we've got the flap servos in place. So next step is the upper corner reinforcers. Now I had cut these as per the plans, but not taken into account they're actually shorter due to the exhaust, 3D printed exhaust that we're putting on, and the 3D printed intakes. So here I'm using the upper aft inner reinforcers, the corners, putting two of them together and just measuring it up against the front. Push that against the intake just to get a wee marking line so I can see where I'm cutting it. And then cut a 45-degree bevel, just so there's a wee bit of bevel cut and it doesn't restrict any of the air hopefully moving through the intakes. Again, small amount of glue across one side, offer to two them up, smudge the glue about, then offer it into place, and it all fitted pretty good at the front. That should hopefully take nice clean air into the intake. Didn't actually use the middle pieces, so I was left with the aft pieces and measured up. That should be long enough. So a small amount of glue across one of them, smudge them together, and you can glue it up against the four pieces. Using a small amount of glue on the contact surfaces of the bulkheads, and then again along one side, smudge about the four corner pieces. A wee bit of glue along the servo reinforcers, then offer it into position. A wee bit of trimming at the front of the intake. The same with the opposite side, and just making sure it's nice and level with the tops of the sides. Cut a small relief for where the servo's gone, and I actually put a small supporting tray underneath with a scrap piece of foam. Not sure we'll actually need it, but thought why not, give it a wee try. Servo nice, be nice and level. Did the same on the opposite side. You should probably have trimmed it up. A wee bit of glue in the contact surfaces for the servo. Now install them in place. I will centre the servos and that later on. So there's the 3D printed tail that I did. Printed that. The nose cone, 3D printed nose cone, 0 infill, I think it was 3 walls. Unfortunately we didn't get them on camera. So as you can see the rear's on, the nose is actually on as well. So it's onto the back panel. Now what I did was I drew a couple of lines, as you can see there, along the back panel from the slot and lining it up against the exhaust, just so I can make sure that when I go to installing the vertical stabilizer it's nice and level. Small amount of Yoo-hoo paw and then smudged it about with a scrap piece of foam. Offered that up into place just to make sure it's nice and level with the back. So next step is putting on the shock cones and intakes. Glued the shock cones, as you can see there. So in here I'm just using some 5-minute epoxy, a small amount of glue along the contact surface. Let's say it was 5-minute epoxy, so I had the pleasure of listening to some nice relaxing music and holding it until the glue set. So we'll fast forward this piece, moving on to, we'll do the same on the opposite side. As you can see, I've just glued it against the sides, the rear fuselage sides, not against the forward fuselage sides itself. Now there is a bit of movement, so what you want to do is push them up so it's nice and level with the top, ready to accept the wing piece. So I had a small amount of Yoo-hoo on the bottom, smudged it about, and then there's some on the top there, and what I'm doing is I just pulled it up so it was nice and level, then held it, and I thought nope, I'm not sitting here waiting till this goes off, and I used a piece of masking tape just to hold it in place. It already had a couple of minutes to air dry. I was sitting there thinking about it, and I thought nope, quite easily just take a piece of masking tape and hold it in position, and then do the same with the opposite side as well. Just make sure they're nice and level with the top, because the wing plate's going to sit down. You want a nice gluing surface. So the next step I'm moving on to was sorting out the elevons and the rudder. Here I've got the 6x1mm carbon flat bar. We're just taping up the underside and then the top side, just to keep it nice and clean as possible when we go to add in epoxy. Again, I'll just use the 5-minute epoxy here. Now for the rear, I've cut 6mm carbon rods. I cut them to 95mm long, and I'm going to push them into the rear exhaust about 25mm, leaving 70. Now it is quite tight, you can't see it in the video, but it was taking a bit of force to go in there, and then just twisting them all the time. It was printed in lightweight PLA, so I was kind of conscious I didn't want to break it, so just be careful. Then I've got 8mm carbon tube. I've cut that to 70mm long, and I'm going to use these to slot into the elevon 6mm bars that we put in for the elevons. So again, we're just taping up the top side, the presentation side of the elevons that we're using. I've got some leading edge that I've got on the elevons and the rudder, sorry, the vertical stabilizer, and I'm sure these leading edges was, well, they've been used before, as you can see the paint. That was the Voodoo. Yeah, unfortunately it came to its demise and inverted, and when down's up and up's expensive. Anyhow, onto the vertical stabilizer. So forcing some epoxy, 5-minute epoxy into the slot, cleaning it up with a scrap piece of foam, then removing the tape, and we'll set that off to the side to let that glue up. So here with the elevons, I'm leaving a wee space on the left hand side here so that we can put in the prop washer later on, and to secure it all, and just some epoxy on the outsides just to hold the spar in place. Here I've got the 3D printed control horns, again small amount of epoxy in the slots, just smudging it out, making sure there's a good contact surface. Push that in. 5-minute epoxy we're using here. Once we're happy that's all in there, smudge it into the grooves, put in these and just let it set. So once it was set, removed all the tape, and I'm just making some push rods. I think it's a 2mm push rod that we have here. Set of Z-bend pliers and just sliding it on and offering it up to the control horn, the linkages, just measuring it to make sure I've got enough wire but just not too much. It was nice and tight fit. Try to remove any slop or as much as possible. Now there was a wee bit of space in here because I'm using stops there, linkage stoppers. I actually had to bend the push rod ever so slightly so it was pointing, because it points upwards as we're looking at here, and making sure that the push rod was going into the linkage stopper nice and level. Hooked up to the radio, making sure it was all going in the right direction. Here I was getting up and down on the ailerons and getting elevator movement, so switched that about. Got them ready with the radio, and then it was time to move on to the wing base or plate. Just remove the carbon spar slot, cover it up with a piece of masking tape. So what we want is that we're looking at is going to be the underside, which will be the presentation side from below, and the reason for that is so that the Depron's in the middle. We don't want to be seeing that. However, if you use a bit of alcohol hand rub, you can quite easily remove that green Depron. So we've got some epoxy in the slot, put in the carbon spar, and then some additional epoxy on the top. I actually made more than I needed to. There was a bit of a waste. Just make sure that we've got a nice even bond all the way along it, and it's all on the contact surfaces. I should have taped it up a bit here so it was nice and clean. But 5-minute epoxy, let that go and set. Once it was done, it's time to test fit. And it all looked like it was going on pretty good. Yeah, I was quite happy with the fit, so it was time to glue it up. So I've got some Yoo-hoo along the bulkheads, and what I chose to do was use some hot glue so that it'll go down and it'll stick a bit quicker than if I was using U-hoop or the contact adhesive. Just kind of held it all in place and just till it was set. So next is the wingtip spars and the wing ribs, offering them up. I was just getting all the wing ribs out. I had them in a wee pile and just sorting them out into twos. And then what I was doing was just offering them up, getting them into the right place on the wing so that I knew where everything was going. And there's a wing bulkhead and the zero ribs, and I was just placing them up so that I knew where it was all going to fit. A couple of test fits with some of them before I actually went to hitting it all with the glue. I did trim that up ever so slightly just so that the wing bulkhead was a wee bit twisted, but very, very simple here. We had the two pieces. I was a bit confused with the rib number 2. There's 2 of them. Obviously I put one in each side and then offered up the second one, so it was a double skin, which will take the 3mm centre skin and the wing skins, the 3mm wing skins. That's why there's 2 formers there. So there's the wing tips. Unfortunately we didn't actually get that on video. So once the wing tips and the ribs were installed, just using some U-hoop or I used a wee bit of epoxy on the wing tips. On the forward fuselage top, it says lower but it's actually the middle. And then this one, so the upper one that we're just installing here, that gives us the magnet hatches, and then the lower or the middle one that we're now putting on, small amount of glue, that gives us the spacing to allow our hatches to go on top of it. So it was a wee bit confusing for me, because the guide was saying put this one down first, but obviously we wouldn't have magnet panels if that was the case. Anyhow, simple process, small amount of glue. I've spoke to Craig about it, it's just in a wee update. Once those were on and happy that the glue had cured, I was putting the battery hatch back in and the receiver hatch, just putting them into position. So the next step is the 3mm skins. Now the plans do say to cut them oversize. On this middle piece, I think the only part that I cut oversize was at the front where it meets up against the intakes, and it was only 2 or 3mm extra that was on it. So small amount of glue, slide it back and forth, give it a wee chance to air dry, and I was just making sure I was gluing all the contact surfaces, and then offer it back up and slide it into position. Then the same with the wing panels. I cut maybe 2mm extra in terms of the template, and it fitted pretty much perfect as well. Slight trimming afterwards. So again, small amount of glue on the contact surfaces for the ribs, and then along the side of the 3mm piece of foam that we've already got on there, the centre skin, using a wee bit of masking tape just to hold it into place. I should have gave the contact glue a wee bit extra time. As you can see, when I was curving it down around the leading edge, it was kind of pulling up at the back there in between the 2 skins. So I used a wee bit of masking tape just to hold it in place. Obviously I will go over it with some filler, fill up the wee gaps. But yeah, we're pretty close to it, pretty close to the end of the build here. So do the same with the opposite side, get the opposite 3mm skin on. The flaps, I have installed the flaps, unfortunately off camera. What I've done, I've got the linkage sitting on the underside of the skin. So here we've got the 3mm wing tips, 3mm foam skins, just using a wee bit of hot glue and sliding it up against the wing plate. Once that had set, I went around the outer edges with a wee touch of hot glue just to hold it down in place. So here's the vertical stabilizer, small amount of glue along the insides, offered up the vertical stabilizer and pushed that into position, and then I used the wee set square there just to make sure it was nice and level, or at the right angle, perpendicular they call it or something. And then the same on the opposite wingtip. And so that's us about done here, pilots. Absolutely fantastic build, very quick. Did it over the weekend. Obviously had all the parts sitting out, cut, ready to go. But yeah, no real problems, no issues. Very, very simple build here. So I've seen one, Tobias built one, fantastic. It was him that got me into building this one. I thought I need a TSR2. It looks absolutely like a missile, and with Tobias on the buttons, he's some guy for the sticks. Absolutely amazing control. So here it is, a wee bit of sanding, wee bit of shaping to do before it hits the paint shop. But I hope, thanks for joining, pilots. I hope this has helped you if you do choose to build the TSR2. And here's mine. Obviously a little bit to do, but like I say, thanks again for joining, pilots, and hope to see more TSR2s coming to us.